What if I told you that the handheld meat pie now considered the Upper Peninsula's defining food was originally eaten end to end, specifically so a miner could discard the crust corner where his initials had been carved, leaving it on the mine floor as an offering to imaginary goblins believed to live in the tunnels? A superstition that may have, completely by accident, protected miners from the arsenic dust coating their own hands? That a soda company started by two Russian Jewish bakers in 1907 had to be sold exclusively within the city of Detroit for half a century, not because nobody wanted it elsewhere, but because nobody could figure out why it kept going flat, until chemists finally traced the problem back to impurities in the very water supply the company had been using the entire time? Michigan, where the mines built one half of the food culture and the lakes built the other. The pasties story begins centuries before Michigan existed, in the tin mines of Cornwall on England's southwestern coast. A hand pie of meat and root vegetables, sealed inside a sturdy crimped pastry crust thick enough to function as its own disposable handle. When Cornwall's tin mining industry collapsed in the early 1800s under pressure from cheaper foreign tin, experienced Cornish miners began emigrating wherever new mining opportunities opened up. And in the 1840s, that meant Michigan's newly discovered copper and iron deposits beneath the forests of the Upper Peninsula. The pasty traveled with them intact. Chipped beef, potatoes, rutabaga, called swede, in Cornwall, and onion, sealed inside dough and carried into the mines for shifts that could run 10 to 12 hours underground. The crust wasn't just packaging, it was insulation, capable of keeping the filling warm for up to 10 hours, and it solved a genuinely dangerous practical problem. Miners' hands were frequently coated in arsenic-laced dust from the rock they were working, so eating directly out of the crust, using it as a built-in handle, meant a miner never had to put bare, contaminated fingers anywhere near the food itself. Each miner's pasty was personalized, his initials carved into one corner of the dough with a toothpick before it went into the oven, so that if he didn't finish the whole thing at once, he'd know which half-eaten pasty was rightfully his later in the shift. Cornish superstition held that small mine-dwelling goblins called buckas lived in the tunnels, and miners traditionally left the initialed crust corner uneaten, tossing it aside specifically to keep the buckas content and avoid mining accidents. In 1905, two Russian Jewish immigrant brothers, Ben and Perry Feigenson, arrived in Detroit. Perry had trained as a baker, but, by most accounts, simply hated the early morning hours the job required. Ben had been working at a soda pop company in Cleveland. Between the two of them, an idea emerged. What if they combined what they already knew, Perry's cake frosting recipes, with the soda water business Ben understood? On November 4th, 1907, the brothers began bottling their first flavors, fruit punch, strawberry, and grape, based directly on frosting recipes Perry had used as a baker, selling them fresh off a horse-drawn wagon the day after each batch was made, because the soda's shelf life was barely more than a single day. They formally named the company Feigenson Brothers Bottling Works, and in 1921, recognizing that the full name was too long to fit on a glass bottle, shortened it to something punchier, Faygo. The company's shelf life problem turned out to be more stubborn than anyone expected. For decades, Faygo's Pop simply couldn't survive shipping outside Michigan without going flat, confining the brand entirely to Detroit and the surrounding state for nearly 50 years. It wasn't until the 1950s that company chemists finally traced the issue to impurities in the water supply they'd been bottling with the entire time. A new filtration system solved the problem almost overnight, and once Faygo began advertising during televised Detroit Tigers broadcasts in the late 1960s, the brand expanded well beyond Michigan's borders for the first time. Predating Faygo. By more than 4 decades, Vernors holds the distinction of being one of America's oldest continuously produced soft drinks, a ginger ale created in Detroit in 1866, with a sharp, intensely spiced bite that distinguishes it immediately from milder national ginger ale brands. Local lore long held that Vernors owed its distinctive flavor to 4 years of aging in oak barrels before bottling, a claim that gave the soda an almost medicinal reputation among generations of Michigan households where it was treated as a folk remedy for upset stomachs as much as a refreshment. The Boston Cooler, a float made by blending Vernors with vanilla ice cream, takes its name not from the city of Boston at all, but from Boston Boulevard in Detroit, a detail that consistently surprises visitors who assume otherwise. Since 1930, a Detroit potato chip company called Better Made has been producing thick-cut, heavily salted chips from a recipe the company maintains has stayed essentially unchanged for nearly a century. The chips are sold in a recognizable red and white bag found in nearly every corner store across the city. And the factory's location on Gratiot Avenue has filled the surrounding neighborhood with the smell of frying potatoes for generations of Detroit residents. Better Made occupies a specific niche in Detroit's regional food identity alongside Faygo and Verner's. Not a nationally distributed brand competing for shelf space against Lay's or Pringles, but a hyper-local product whose absence outside Michigan registers as a genuine point of confusion for natives who move away and can't find it anywhere else. The Coney dog occupies a permanent, fiercely contested place in Detroit's food landscape. A hot dog topped with a meat sauce built from beef heart, yellow mustard, and diced raw onion, served on a steamed bun. The rivalry between two adjacent downtown Detroit restaurants, American Coney Island and Lafayette Coney Island, has divided families and friend groups for generations, with each restaurant claiming to be the original and most loyal customers, treating the choice between them as close to a permanent identity. The distinctive natural casing wiener, with its characteristic snap, and the specific spice blend in the meat sauce, different from chili found anywhere else in the country, combine into a dish that, despite the name, has nothing to do with Coney Island in New York and everything to do with the wave of Greek and Macedonian immigrants who built Detroit's Coney restaurant culture in the early 20th century. Every February, in the days leading up to Ash Wednesday, Michigan's significant Polish-American population, concentrated historically in Detroit's Hamtramck neighborhood, turns the calendar over to a single pastry. The paczki, a dense, deep-fried Polish donut traditionally filled with fruit preserves or sweet cream and dusted heavily with powdered sugar. The tradition traces directly to the Catholic practice of using up rich, perishable ingredients, sugar, eggs, lard, before the fasting restrictions of Lent began, turning what was originally a practical pre-Lenten cleanup into one of Michigan's most anticipated annual food events. Hamtramck's Fat Tuesday Paczki celebrations now draw visitors from across the state specifically for the holiday, with bakeries selling out entirely of their day's stock hours before closing. Pronunciation remains a genuine point of pride and correction among Michigan's Polish-American community. It's punchki, not the more intuitive-looking punski that out-of-staters frequently attempt. Mackinac Island, a small, car-free island in Lake Huron, accessible only by ferry, has built an entire tourism identity around a single confection since the late 1800s, when shops like Murdoch's began producing handmade fudge using a specific technique, cooking the candy in copper kettles, then pouring it out onto chilled marble slabs to be paddled and worked by hand until it reaches the right texture. The technique itself, performed in shop windows where tourists can watch the entire process, has become as much a part of the island's appeal as the candy itself. Visitors are affectionately nicknamed fudgies by locals, a term that originated specifically because of how thoroughly tourists transform once they encounter the island's fudge shops. Murdoch's, Ryba's, and May's all trace their fudge-making traditions back to roughly the same era, and the rivalry between island fudge shops, while considerably more good-natured than Detroit's Coney Dog Wars, runs along similarly fierce lines of personal brand loyalty. Michigan grows more tart cherries than any other state in the country, concentrated specifically in the orchards surrounding Traverse City on the northwestern shore of the Lower Peninsula, where Lake Michigan's moderating effect on regional temperature creates conditions especially well-suited to growing Montmorency cherries. The tart cherry industry built an entire local economy and tourism identity around the fruit, anchored by Traverse City's National Cherry Festival, held every July since the 1920s and now drawing hundreds of thousands of visitors for cherry pie contests, parades, and a celebration that has grown well beyond its original agricultural roots into one of the largest food festivals in the Midwest. Michigan ranks among the top producers of dry edible beans in the entire United States, particularly navy beans, the small white bean that, somewhat improbably, traces a direct line from Michigan farmland to the U.S. Senate dining room, where Senate bean soup has been a continuously served menu staple for well over a century, made overwhelmingly from Michigan-grown navy beans. The state's bean-growing tradition runs through the same fertile farmland that supports Michigan's broader agricultural economy, and navy bean soup, simple, hearty, built from dried beans simmered for hours with ham or salt pork, remains a practical winter staple across the state's rural communities, a less glamorous but genuinely foundational counterpart to the cherries and fudge that get most of Michigan's food tourism attention. Michigan's food culture runs on a genuine geographic split that few other states experience quite so literally. An upper peninsula shaped almost entirely by 19th-century Cornish mining immigration, and a lower peninsula shaped by waves of Polish, Greek, Macedonian, and Russian Jewish immigrants who built Detroit's industrial economy, and alongside it, an entirely separate regional food identity built on soda pop, hot dogs, and Lenten donuts. The pasty crossed an ocean folded into a single hand pie and picked up a superstition about tunnel goblins along the way. A superstition that may have accidentally protected miners from arsenic poisoning, even though nobody designed it for that purpose. Two brothers who didn't even particularly want to be in the bakery business ended up building one of the most enduringly local soda brands in the country, hamstrung for 50 years by a water supply problem nobody bothered diagnosing until the 1950s. An island with no cars built its entire visitor economy on watching candy get paddled on a marble slab. Not every state has two completely distinct, geographically separated food cultures that rarely overlap on the same plate. Not every state's most beloved soda existed for half a century before anyone realized impurities in the local water, not the recipe, were the actual problem. Not every state's defining hand pie carries a 19th century superstition about underground goblins as part of its origin story.